Allow me to share with you my crazy story of having a home birth in the middle of a snowstorm. My birth story all starts with the week leading up to birth. So I had my last ER nursing shift on a Monday, and I was 39 weeks a few days before that. So this is my week of being 39 weeks. I really didn't think that I was going to have my baby until after my due date, between 40 and 41, because that's what had happened with my other two babies. However, Mother Nature had something else in mind. So I'd worked a half shift on that Monday. It was supposed to be my last one. It was a fun day, whatever. Well, I happened to have one other coworker who had the same due date as me, and I got a notification at the end of my shift that day at 7 p.m. that she was actually in labor on the other side of the hospital in the labor and delivery unit. So I ran over there to be with her in labor because she was alone for a bit waiting for her partner to show up, and I knew that she needed some help. So I went to help her, and I remember being there and texting my midwife that, hey, guess what? I'm actually in the labor and delivery unit of the hospital, but not for me, haha. And she told me later that when she got that text, she knew that my birth was going to come soon as well, just because of all the extra oxytocin that I was around and, seeing the babies and being around someone else who was in the throes of it and me being so close. So turns out she was right. Well, the next day, so Tuesday, we started having a huge snowstorm. Definitely the biggest snowstorm of the year. We don't get a ton of snowstorms here in Arkansas where I am, but this was our time. So it was 0 degrees as well. Also hardly ever gets that cold around here, but it was that cold that week. And it snowed just all day. It was snowing before the sun came up and snowing way after the sun went down. And that was the vibe of the day. I had gotten a couple of phone calls that day from family members being like, "You're not going to have this baby in the snowstorm, are you?" And I was like, "No, I'm not. I don't think I'm going to have the baby till next week. We're all good." Of course, I was wrong. So while I was cooking dinner, I was noticing that contractions were happening regularly, but they didn't hurt at all. They just felt like regular Braxton Hicks contractions. They were just happening very frequently. And I was paying attention to them, and I thought, man, surely this isn't like early labor. I mean, I'm really not expecting it. Well, I decided to go ahead and pull out a contraction timer on my phone just to make sure, because I knew I needed to be extra on top of it given that it was the snowstorm and my midwife is going to have a hard enough time getting out of the house to get to me anyway. So if it was the real thing, I had to be on it. I noticed that I was developing a lot of anxiety around these contractions and whether or not this was happening. Also learned later that anxiety can be a big part of early labor because your body's got all these hormones going on and you also know what's about to happen. I went ahead and called my midwife. I told her, "Hey, I don't think this is the real thing, but this is what's happening. Can you check to see what it would be like for you to get out of your driveway?" And she said, "Yeah, let me go figure that out. You go rest, try to make the contractions stop, take a nice bath, take magnesium, all these things." Well, she ended up going ahead and coming to the house just to be safe, since on my last birth, it had gone really fast. And so we definitely didn't want me to have a fast birth in a snowstorm and her not be able to be there. So she was on the safe side and just came and spent the night in our living room. I had a very restless night, as you can imagine. I woke up many times, but around midnight to 2 a.m., I remember feeling the contractions getting just a little bit stronger and thinking, hey, it's still happening. These haven't gone away. So let's go ahead and set up the birth pool, because who knows? And I want to make sure that I have the pool with me on hand. I would rather not be without it because the water makes a huge difference for me. So in the middle of the night, me and my husband and the midwife all turned the living room into a nice little birthing center. So I made it through my restless night. I tried to get as much sleep as possible, but when I got up in the morning and got my kids up and ate breakfast and started moving around, that's when I noticed that there was a big shift in my contractions. So it became clear that this was indeed happening. And it was totally white with several inches of snow outside. And it was literally 0 degrees in Arkansas. And I told my husband, hey, you need to call my parents to come and pick up the older kids because this show is getting on the road. My dad had to drive here in the snow across town to pick up my kids, and it was a whole ordeal. At one point before he was here, I said, call him again because this is really happening and I need these kids to get out of here because, of course, in the meantime, they're in the background fighting over toys and whatnot, and my husband's having to pay attention to them instead of to actually what's happening with me. My midwife was trying to find an assistant to help us in the snow because the people who were supposed to be there could no longer be there because they couldn't get out of their driveways. And I finally started having my husband apply counter pressure to my back and my hips during contractions because they were getting strong enough to where I really needed to focus and needed some extra help. That went on for a couple hours, and then I got to a stall point. So this didn't happen with my other 2 births, but it was due to asynclitism, which is just a fancy way of saying that the baby's head wasn't totally aligned with the birth canal and with my hips. And so I needed to move around the house and try different positions in order to get his head to just turn very slightly in order to make it through. That was very painful. I hadn't experienced that before, and having to have that extra pressure like bowling ball in my pelvis every time that I moved around and just even in between contractions was still very painful. But ultimately, after doing lots of different positions and trying to take a brief little rest as much as possible, all of a sudden the urge to push came, and it was like, whoa, it is here. Pushed the baby out within a few minutes. Although one funny part of that is that I pushed the head out, but then the rest of the body was still inside of me, and I could feel and see the baby moving his head outside of me and also feel him moving inside of me at the same time. That was a super weird feeling. When he was born, he actually came out with little marks on his hands, which was very unique. So we were really worried at first that maybe it was some kind of weird infection, that he was already born with these blisters. It turns out they were actually little marks on his hands where he had been sucking on them inside the womb. After he was born, my baby's name is Everett, by the way. After Everett was born, I was starving. I remember getting up and trying to walk from the birth pool to the bathroom with my midwife, and all I could feel and think about was, I'm starving. My stomach feels like a black hole. We also decided to take a quick visit to the ER in the middle of the snow, of course, just to get the little blisters on his hands checked out, since we thought we knew what they were from, but just to make sure that they were an infection. Turns out we were all good, and it was indeed just from him sucking on his hands in the womb, which is crazy. We did get a little bit of a break for a couple hours before we had our 2 older kids and the grandparents come meet baby Everett. Overall, I would say that out of my 3 births, this 3rd one was actually my most difficult birth because of his head being a little bit wonky and prolonging the intensity of labor. But it actually has been my best recovery. I'm 2 months postpartum now, have my sweet little 2-month-old baby, and my body's actually doing really well. I found it to be super helpful to be able to listen to my body during labor and make adjustments for what my body needs. I definitely thought about an epidural during the most challenging contractions, but I'm glad I persevered, and I do have a beautiful baby boy to show for it.